So I want to start our reflection this morning with a bit of a history lesson, a really, really early history lesson from the Bible, one of our early creation stories. You all know the story. It goes something like this. In the beginning, when God created the earth, it was formless and dark, and out of the darkness on day one, God created heaven and earth, light and dark, and day and night. And then the story continues to say that on day two, God created a dome, sky, and water. And above the dome sky was the water. And I'm going to give us the abbreviated version here and say that on day four, there was sun and moon and stars, and they were set into place. And on day six, humans were made, given dominion over the creatures of the earth. And finally, on day 7, what happened? God rests. So does anybody know what God said after each part of creation was created? It was good. It was good. So here's a bit of history about this story. It was told about 750 years before Common Era. You know that's before Jesus was born, right? So about 750 years before Jesus was born. The story was most likely told orally for many years before it was written down. And I kind of like to imagine that it was being told around the campfire by wise elderly women and men telling stories, but most likely not. The story was told by Hebrew people, Israelites, who had been exiled from their land and living in Babylon. And because the Hebrew people were exiled and living in turmoil, they needed a story to help them make sense of the chaos that they were experiencing. And so they took on a Babylonian creation myth, a myth that helped them understand how God made organization out of chaos. A myth that helped them explain that God was in control and that creation was good, despite the struggles that they were going through. And so they took this story, this Babylonian creation story, myth, and they made it their own by changing some of the details of the story. In other words, the creation story that we hear in Genesis 1 was told by exiled people who were looking for comfort in a troubled world. So, have you ever wondered what the earth might have looked like in our ancient brothers according to their myth? I have a diagram for you, Michael. There we go. So this is what it may have looked like. The earth, if you notice from this picture, is a disk, a round disk. And it's surrounded by water, not only on the sides, but underneath and above. So there's water all around the disk. And there's a bowl or a firmament. That's the line that's up at the top there to keep the water back. That's what holds the water back. And then if you look really carefully, there's rain and hail and snow. That's held back by floodgates. Right underneath, there's floodgates there. And deep below is Sheol, and that's where the dead goes. And God dwells above. So interesting, isn't it? It's not what we think of. I think it's safe to say that most of us don't believe that the earth looks like this. And I think that it's safe for us to say that most of us don't believe that the earth was formed exactly in the way that it was described in Genesis 1. Although many of us might take some deep spiritual meaning from the Genesis creation story, I'm assuming that most of us might have a different scientific understanding about how creation was made. By the way, there are more than one creation story in Genesis. There's also the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. We know that story also. Actually, if you search the Bible, you will see that there are many stories of creation. and Jeannie shared one of them with us. For instance, also in John 1, it says that in the beginning the Word was the Word, and the Word was with God. The words in John 1 is understood to be Jesus Christ, or the word that they're referring to as Logos, or Jesus Christ. In other words, in the Gospel of John, Christ was in the beginning. In Proverbs, as Jeannie noted, puts wisdom at the beginning of creation. Ages ago, I was set up, says wisdom, at the first before the beginning of the earth. When there was no depth, I was brought forth. That's from Proverbs 8. And in Galatians, Christ, again, is at the beginning of creation. And it goes like this. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. In him, all things were created. So that's Galatians 1. So it's interesting, isn't it? Interesting that there would be so many different accounts of creation in our Bible. Interesting how they all differ just slightly. So here's the thing that I believe. I believe that our ancient brothers and sisters never intended their stories to be scientific understandings of the universe. Actually, science wasn't even part of their world, at least not in the way that we understand science. That didn't come until the Enlightenment. Instead, I believe that their stories were much more than science. They had deep spiritual meaning, a meaning that pointed to something more important in their lives than facts and figures. But rather, their stories was about relationships. Relationships with God, relationships with creation, relationships with humanity. Our ancient brothers and sisters' stories were about struggle and joy and making sense out of a world that was chaotic. They were stories about mystery and awe. So speaking of mystery and awe, there's a creation story, a new creation story being told. It's a weaving of our current understanding about creation with an understanding of the divine presence infused within creation. A story of science bathed in holy mystery. And I have an image for us for that too, Michael. The story goes something like this. In the beginning, there was nothing. No objects, no time, no space. But there was energy. A holy mystery that contained within itself unlimited possibilities. And in order to realize those possibilities, that energy that was smaller than an atom and only a little heavier than a grain of sand compacted upon itself until it became it became so hot that there was something that some people call a Big Bang. And from that Big Bang came gases and possibilities. And as the gases cooled, something began to be. It unfolded out to create space, and it began a journey which created time. And the universe was born. But that's not the end. The holy mystery could not be contained within itself. As time went on, stars burned, gravity exerted its force, and planets danced. Entire galaxies were formed, millions of them, millions floating into space. Then on one tiny planet in the remote corner of one of the galaxies, the energy of creation began to reshape itself in a different way. A particular moment when the warmth from the sun and the moisture of the atmosphere was just right. Energy formed itself into life. Rain fell, dust turned, green appeared, and water and grasses grew. So did microbes and bacteria and insects and great whales all evolved from the beginning of life. And life threw itself into a dance of different forms. swimming in the sea and crawling on the land, playing and testing their surrounding. Life was changing and changing again, from sea creatures to mammals to people, all singing together in the dance of life. And we call this Earth. And one day, we humans looked upon what we could see, perhaps through a telescope. And it was rich and wonderful and good. And we looked and we saw the energy of creation flowing in the universe far beyond the reaches of our eyes and our telescope. And as we looked and admired, we found a word for that energy. We called it God, or Divine One, or Holy Mystery, or Ground of Being, God of many names. For from Holy Mystery we have come. Without God we would not be, nor would anything be. The divine is within us, the divine is beyond us, the divine is around us. And we rely on the divine for every breath that we take. Nothing we do can be done apart from the grace and power that brings us into being and sustains us. So for the past 4 weeks, we have been making our way through the seasons of creation. I don't think I need to tell any one of us that creation is indeed an awesome mystery beyond our complete understanding, despite the science that we have. And I don't think I need to tell anyone that we are connected to all that is, and that we are both dependent and interdependent on the earth and all its creatures. We need the water, we need the air, the trees, the animals. We need all of creation in order to survive. I also don't think I need to tell any one of us here that we aren't doing a great job of caring for creation. Instead, we have treated it as a resource for our own selfish use, as if we stand alone, as if we are the ones in control. Maybe that's where we can learn from the first creation myth that I talked about. As if we are without God. So here's the thing. Whether we understand our creation story as science infused in holy mystery, or creation with wisdom at its side, or Christ at the beginning, or even creation with a dome and floodgates, our creation stories matter. They matter to our ancient brothers and sisters because they offered them an understanding of God who made order out of chaos. And they matter to us because if we understand God to be creator and creating here with us as holy mystery connected to all that is, then we too become part of God's holy mystery connected to all life. And when we know ourselves to be part of God's holy mystery connected to all life, we are less likely to destroy what we are connected to. Our stories matter because they remind us that there is a holy mystery that we might call divine presence or God. And God is here with us. If not right here, then right here, or even right here, or up here. And when we know God to be present, how can we not help but protect and celebrate all that is? And I want to end with a poem written by Carol Scott. Carol, for you, those who don't know, is a member of this congregation, and she has written this book filled with poetry. It's called Mystic Proportions. Stars, galaxies, parallel universes, cosmic wonders pulsate waiting to be explored. Portals blink, opening and closing like ponderous eyelids, opening to glimpse the future, closing to ponder and dream. Journeys of mythic proportions are embarked on, captained by courageous dreamers, sailing across Milky Ways and beyond the last star. Evolution takes so long. Will there be anything left of cellular memory to reclaim that once we too were the dreamers? And may it be so. Amen.